Alright, in this video we're going to continue with editing this strange object that I've created here. And we're going to talk about modifiers. Modifiers is very important in 3ds Max. Modifiers are used for all kinds of different things. So let me just go ahead and show you through a practical example what modifiers do and where to get them from. Okay, so let's go to the Modify panel and make sure that this object is selected. This is the modifier stack or the modifier list over here. In this little window. Now right now we only have one object in this stack, which is the editable poly, which is this object itself. Okay, what we need to do is get a modifier and put a modifier on top of this to go ahead and alter and make changes to this as we see fit. So where can we get modifiers from? Well, there's two different places we can get modifiers from. We can get them from here where it says modifiers list, or modifier list I should say. This drop down box will open up and bombard you with a ton of different modifiers. As you can see, there's lots of modifiers to choose from, so the ways that you can edit this object here are pretty much limitless. Where else can we activate or get access to modifiers? Well, if we go to the main menu, you'll see a modifiers menu item here. And basically, it's just another way of getting access to the same modifiers that are in the modifier list. So we have modifiers for mesh editing. We have modifiers for cloth, hair and fur, UV mapping. We have modifiers for even for cameras and things like that. So we have a lot of modifiers. And what you do is you basically choose a modifier that you need and you just select it, and 3ds Max will put the modifier on top of the object and make the changes that are needed. So let's see how we can do that. Simple example. Let's go to where it says subdivision surfaces and we get three modifiers. Let's choose the turbo smooth modifier. So let's select that. What the turbo smooth modifier does, it smooths out the object and adds more geometry. As you can see, there's more edges and more lines on this object. Okay, so it has more polygons. Over here, we see options for the turbo smooth modifier. And up here in the modifier list, we can see that the turbo smooth modifier is on top of the edit poly object. Now you notice here there's this sort of icon that looks like a light bulb. Well, if we click on that and turn it off, it mutes the turbo smooth modifier, so we can't see the effects of the turbo smooth modifier on this object. So if we click on it again, it reactivates the modifier to go ahead and allow us to see the end result of this object. Now, if we go ahead and right click on the turbo smooth modifier, we can hit delete and that'll get rid of the modifier and we'll go back to square one. So let's go back to modifiers, and I'm going to go back to subdivision surfaces and apply the turbo smooth modifier again. Okay. Another way of deleting the turbo smooth modifier is by simply clicking and dragging and dropping, or sorry about that. Edit that part out of the video. Edit that part out of the video. Starting again in 3, 2, 1. Another way of getting rid of the turbo smooth modifier is simply to select it and then click on this little trash can icon down here, and that'll delete the modifier from the modifier stack. Hit Ctrl Z to undo that operation and get the turbo smooth modifier back. Okay. Now with the turbo smooth modifier selected, the options that are available for the turbo smooth modifier will show up here in this lower section of the modify command panel. Okay, so we get different options. Each modifier has its own set of options. So in this case, the turbo smooth modifier has an iteration option, and right now has an iteration of 1. And what iteration basically means, it's a fancy word that means smoothness, so to speak. So if we click that up and take it up to a level of 2, now you can see the object gets nice and smooth. Actually starting to look like the head of a dog, or a primitive dog head. And as we go higher and higher to levels, this object has more and more polygons. But the trade-off is that the object is nice and smooth. See that? It's not jagged, it's not squared anymore, it's nice and smooth. So in this case, the turbo smooth modifier is great for doing organic surfaces like characters, people, monsters, animals, or maybe any type of organic things that you have to do, like a fancy looking vase or lamp or something like that. Okay, so let me knock down the iterations back to 1. And we have different options here for different things. So there's tons of modifiers to choose from. There's a whole bunch that you can use for all kinds of different things in 3ds Max. And I encourage you to go ahead and experiment and play around with these modifiers, and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty with them and see what a lot of them do and see what you can create using a lot of these different modifiers. The neat thing is that we can stack modifiers on top of modifiers, so you're not limited to one modifier by a long shot. What you can do is you can add more modifiers. So on top of the turbo smooth modifier, I can go back to modifiers. I can say, let's go to, let me see. Let's go and get a symmetry modifier. So I can add a symmetry modifier to this. I could change the parameters of the symmetry modifier to say the y-axis. So now this thing is symmetrized. So now both halves look the same. That's really starting to look really strange there. Okay. So we can drop even more modifiers on top of the symmetry modifier. So we can go to modifiers, go to say UV coordinates, and drop an unwrap UVW modifier on top of that, so we can start to UV map this thing. You can see the UVs right here, and so on and so forth. And then when we're all finished and we're happy with the results of this of what we created with this modifier stack, we can right click in the modifier stack and we can click on collapse all, and that's going to collapse everything. Now before you collapse, 3D Max is going to go ahead and give you a warning. Basically what it's saying is you're about to collapse this whole modifier stack and you won't have access to those modifiers anymore. Basically you're going to go ahead and make these changes concrete, so they won't be able to change in the future. Are you sure you want to do this? Well, maybe you don't want to, maybe you do. In this case, I do, so I'll hit yes. So now this object is what's known as collapsed. The whole modifier stack was collapsed, and all we have now is the editable mesh object in the modifier stack. All the other stuff was collapsed, and the changes to it were made permanent. The changes were made completely permanent, so now we can't go back and make any changes. Of course, you can always hit Control Z to undo and go back. But if you had closed this scene and then you come back tomorrow and open up 3ds Max, you won't be able to undo. You'll lose the changes. So if you want to be able to make changes to this to these modifiers in the modifier stack, leave them alone, don't collapse them, and when you come back next week or tomorrow, whenever, those modifiers will still be in the stack, and you can always take them and delete these different modifiers, get rid of them. You can reorganize them and things. So you can say put the unwrap down here above the edit poly. Maybe you want to put the turbo smooth above the symmetry, and that changes the outcome and the results of the final look of this object, as you can see. So those are modifiers in a nutshell. There's just so many modifiers and so many combinations that you can use. Basically, the possibilities are limitless, and you're limited only by your own imagination. So I encourage you to experiment with modifiers, try them out, see what you can do, and have some fun with them.